Looking at Federalist 78 today, starting with Federalist 78, in 5 papers, Hamilton covers the judicial branch of the American government. And you will soon become familiar with the idea of judicial review, the doctrine of judicial review. That's the doctrine that the courts, and specifically the Supreme Court, can say an act of the Congress passes a law, whether that law is constitutional or not. And if it's not constitutional, they can declare it null and void. So it's a very important idea to talk about. So the reason I have these 2 websites right here in front of you is that for you to learn more about the idea of judicial review and learn actually more in depth. These are some of the places that you can go. National Constitution Center, which I've talked about, and look at the writings of different scholars about these subjects. And teachingamericanhistory.org, I've said that there's an introduction, a summary of every one of the Federalist Papers on this site, as well as some of the resources that you might be using. So take a look at these 2. If it's your first time you're going through the Federalist and coming up with the idea of coming across the idea of judicial review, it's good to have other resources to go to. But just keep in mind that the very basic fundamental thing that judicial review stands for is that Constitution is the fundamental law of the country. And if any branch, any of the executive or legislative branch does something contrary to the Constitution, the courts can say their actions has been, or their laws they've passed, or the laws they're working on will be unconstitutional, null and void. And Hamilton will say that this is one of the best things we've done, is that we have made independent judiciary. We've created a court system that will be an independent branch to make sure that especially the legislative branch doesn't overstep its bounds. And for us to be able to do this, we have to make sure that the judges are appointed for life. They will serve during good behavior, and their salary is not going to be dependent on the whim of the legislators. Legislature cannot come and say, we're going to decrease your salary because you ruled on a case in a way we don't like. And they're not going to be able to get fired just because they rule in a certain way that the legislative branch or the executive branch doesn't like. So they get this position for life. Also, their salary is stable, cannot be changed, at least cannot be decreased. So it gives them the independence they need to be a fair judge of the acts of the government. So just keep that in mind. I'm just saying it in a very basic way. If it's your first time you're going through, I'm going to show you a few books here that will be helpful to you understand this idea a little bit more in depth when you get to the point where you want to study it a little bit more in depth. I've probably shown you some of these books before, but it's good to have just to kind of review them again. because they talk about all the Federalist Papers, and especially if you want to focus on Federalist 78 or Judicial Review, you can find some of these ideas here. The Political Theory of the Federalist by David F. Epstein. There are also multiple articles here. Saving the Revolution, the Federalist Papers, and the American Founding. It's edited by Charles Kessler. Philosophy, the Federalist and the Constitution by Morton White. This is another one, The Federalist, a classic on federalism and free government by Dietz, Dietze. This one is called The Federalist Design for a Constitutional Republic by George W. Carey, Carey. Now, most of the Federalists that are out there as a book format, this one has got a better, nicer print. It's actually large enough where you can read it well, and then it's got footnotes, good footnotes. It's by J.R. Pohl. He also has a book that I've probably shown you on a selection of anti-Federalist as well as Federalist Papers. So that one is pretty good too. All of them have the same text. All of them have great introductions. I've shown you a number of these editions of these Federalists. But this one, just the print is more manageable. You can read better on it. Read it better, I should say. But it totally doesn't matter when you go and look at them online or look at it as an ebook, because you can change the print yourself. In a book format, this one is easier to read. In this book, The Framing and Ratification of the Constitution, edited by Leonard Livy and Dennis Mahoney, Mahoney. This is a pretty good collection of essays to read, and also I've mentioned the book called Beyond Confederation. That's an excellent book to read too. That's a collection of articles also. Yeah, this is the title, Beyond Confederation. It's a really good book to look at. Let me start reading first part of the Federalist 78. We proceed now to an examination of the Judiciary Department of the proposed government. In unfolding the defects of the existing Confederation, the utility and necessity of a federal judicature have been clearly pointed out. It is the less necessary to recapitulate the considerations there urged, as the propriety of the institution in the abstract is not disputed, the only questions which have been raised being relative to the manner of constituting it and to its extent. So how the judicial branch is constituted and to what extent it's given power. To these points, therefore, our observations shall be confined. The manner of constituting it seems to embrace these several objects. First, the mode of appointing the judges. Second, the tenure by which they are to hold their places. Third, the partition of judiciary authority between different courts and their relations to each other. One thing you need to keep in mind that when he started writing these 5 papers regarding the judiciary, there had been some papers, anti-Federalist papers. It's actually some of the best anti-Federalist papers that were being printed under the pseudonym Brutus. And it probably was Robert Yates of New York. And he's not only talking about the judicial branch of the government, but he's also defending the constitutions against the attacks by Brutus. I've mentioned this many times. Every time you read these papers, just keep in mind that Publius, whether it's Hamilton, Jay, or Madison, are defending the Constitution, explaining federalism, explaining the provisions in this Constitution, and also answering all those anti-federalist criticisms that are being printed in papers in New York. Keep in mind that Publius makes references to the idea of judicial review in Federalist 7, 16, and 44, directly and indirectly. And the term judicial review, the phrase judicial review, does not really come into existence till a very famous case called Marbury versus Madison was decided by the John Marshall Supreme Court in 1803. So just keep that in mind, and we'll come back and start reading the rest of this paper in the next videos, I should say.